The Elysium groaned as its hull adjusted to the planet's gravity, a sound like distant thunder echoing through the corridors. Outside the viewports, the world stretched out a vast, gray expanse veined with luminescent rivers that pulsed like slow-beating hearts. Captain Veyra's voice cut through the silence, sharp with unease. This world wasn't on any star chart, so why does it feel like it's waiting for us? The crew exchanged glances, their breath fogging the cold air. Then the scanners lit up, revealing the outline of something massive beneath the surface, a structure too precise, too deliberate to be natural. As the first seismic tremors rattled the ship, the realization hit. Whatever slept below wasn't just buried, it was alive, and it had just opened its eyes. The landing struts of the Elysium sank into the planet's ashen soil, sending plumes of fine dust swirling into the thin air. Terraforming drones detached from their bays with mechanical precision, their scanners humming as they mapped the terrain. Engineer Kael crouched beside a patch of exposed ground, running his gloved fingers through the unnaturally uniform soil. "This isn't right," he muttered, voice tight with suspicion. "No weathering, no stratification. It's like someone laid this down yesterday." Nearby, Lieutenant Veyra traced the jagged edge of a rock formation, her flashlight catching on sharp, deliberate lines. The patterns weren't erosion or random fractures, they formed precise angles, intersecting in ways nature never could. Her pulse quickened as she followed them, step by step, until the ground abruptly dropped away into a yawning cavern mouth. The beam of her light vanished into the darkness, swallowed whole. A gust of stale, metallic air hissed from below, carrying a whisper of machinery or something older. Above them, the drones suddenly veered off course, their sensors flickering erratically. Whatever lay beneath this world wasn't just buried, it was waiting. And the crew of the Elysium had just knocked on its door. The cavern swallowed the beams of their headlamps whole, stretching deeper than the Elysium scanners could reach. The air tasted stale, thick with the tang of oxidized metal and something older, a scent like lightning frozen in time. Ahead, the walls twisted into geometric patterns, their surfaces etched with glyphs that seemed to shift under the light. Scientist Oriel traced a trembling hand over the markings, her translator struggling to pass the jagged symbols. "It's not a language," she whispered. "It's a warning." The crew pressed forward, their boots kicking up clouds of ancient dust until the cavern yawned open into a chamber so vast its ceiling vanished into darkness. There, rooted into the planet's crust like a fossilized god, stood the machine. Towering ribs of blackened alloy curved around a central core, its surface pulsing with faint bioluminescence, not dead but dormant. Oriel's device chimed softly as it deciphered a fragment of text scrolling along the base. Her breath caught. "This isn't just a terraforming device," she said, voice hollow. "It's a prison." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Before anyone could speak, the ground shuddered, a seismic groan reverberating through the chamber. From the depths of the machine, a single, dissonant note hummed to life, vibrating through their bones. It wasn't a sound a machine should make. It was a sound something alive would make, stretched and distorted, like a voice calling through time. Lieutenant Veyra's grip tightened on her rifle. "We woke it up," she muttered. Above them, the glyphs flickered crimson, as if the walls themselves had opened their eyes. The machine's core flared to life with a searing blue radiance, casting jagged shadows across the cavern walls. Captain Veyra's shout, "Fall back to the tunnel," was swallowed by a deafening metallic shriek as the cavern entrance slammed shut, sealing them inside with a finality that vibrated through their bones. The air crackled with static, and the holographic projection erupted from the machine's base, flickering like a dying star. A skeletal alien figure loomed above them, its elongated limbs and hollow eyes pieced together from fractured light. Its voice, when it spoke, wasn't sound, it was vibration, rattling their teeth as it echoed inside their skulls. "Containment breach," it intoned. "This facility houses Experiment Sigma." All prior custodial teams were repurposed. The projection flickered, revealing a snapshot of grotesque figures fused with machinery, their bodies twisted into the architecture itself. Engineer Kael recoiled, his tool clattering to the ground. "Those aren't statues," he breathed. "They're failures." The machine's core pulsed faster now, its rhythm matching the panicked hammering of their hearts. Deep below, something shifted, a seismic groan, followed by the unmistakable sound of hydraulics hissing to life. Layers of the chamber floor began to slide apart, revealing a yawning shaft descending into blackness. From the abyss, a scent rose, ozone and decay, the stench of something ancient and hungry. Lieutenant Dara's rifle snapped up as the first metallic tendril slithered over the edge, its surface glistening with a film of biomechanical fluid. The hologram's final words dissolved into static. "Terraforming protocols cannot be halted. The planet will be corrected." Then the lights died, all but the glowing veins in the walls now throbbing crimson. The crew stood frozen in the bloody half-light, realizing the terrible truth. They weren't pioneers, they were prey, and the hunt had just begun. Engineer Kael's fingers flew across his portable diagnostic screen, the glow casting sharp shadows under his eyes. "We overload the core and fry its circuits now," he hissed, jabbing a finger at the flickering schematics. "That thing is rewriting the planet's crust under our feet." Next tremor could liquefy us. Scientist Oriel slammed her hand over his screen, her face pale but determined. "Are you blind? This isn't just some malfunctioning terraformer. It's a Rosetta Stone for an entire extinct civilization." Her voice cracked as she gestured to the pulsing glyphs. "That blackened goo on the wall, it's computational gel. This machine thinks in biochemistry we've never even..." A shrill scream cut her off. Crewman Wren's bootprints ended abruptly near a cluster of glyphs, his thermal signature blinking out mid-stride. All that remained was a sizzling black streak creeping across the stone like spilled ink. Captain Veyra's composure shattered. "Mission aborted, rally point Alpha in 90 seconds. She grabbed Oriel's arm, but the scientist yanked free, her eyes wild. "You run now, we die in orbit when this planet finishes its correction." The argument died as the Elysium's emergency beacon wailed through their earpieces, then cut to silence. Above them, the cavern ceiling trembled, dislodging a rain of bone-dry sediment. Through the settling dust, the crew watched in horror as the glyphs began rearranging themselves, forming a new message that burned itself across every surface at once. Quarantine initiated. Containment requires biomass. The Elysium's landing lights flickered and died, plunging the surface into darkness. Somewhere in the ship's dead corridors, a hatch hissed open of its own accord. The comms unit crackled to life with a burst of static so violent it sent the crew scrambling for their ears. Then came the voice, crewman Wren's, but not. Each syllable dragged, stretched like taffy, the cadence all wrong, as if something unfamiliar with human speech had puppeted his vocal cords. "You shouldn't have woken us," it intoned, the words slithering through the speakers. The signal pulsed from a sinkhole half a click northeast, its rim crusted with the same blackened gel that had consumed Wren. Lieutenant Dara's boots skidded on the brittle ground as she approached, her rifle scope painting the hole in sickly green, just in time to catch the edge's breathing. The soil contracted like a lung, exhaling a gust of metallic rot. Then the ground beneath them liquefied. Captain Veyra's scream was swallowed by the rush of collapsing earth as they plummeted into blackness, the walls flashing past in a nightmare mosaic, veins of bioluminescent tubing threaded through pulsating organic metal, throbbing in time with some unseen heart. They hit the chamber floor hard, the impact jarring bones, their headlamps slicing through clouds of swirling spores to reveal the truth. The walls weren't walls. They were membranes stretched taut over rib-like struts, their surfaces studded with half-formed faces, crew from prior expeditions, their mouths gaping in silent screams, their flesh fused seamlessly with the structure. The comms unit, miraculously intact, spat Wren's voice again, this time in unison with 100 others. "Welcome to the circulatory system." Above them, the sinkhole sealed itself with a wet, muscular squelch. The labyrinth had them now, and it was hungry. Ahead, the passage branched like arteries, each tunnel lined with what looked like nerve clusters, bioluminescent nodules that dimmed as the crew passed, as if recoiling from their presence. Engineer Kael's scanner beeped frantically, its display showing the same impossible reading in every direction, 0 meters to containment perimeter. "We're inside it," he whispered. Scientist Oriel pressed a shaking hand to the nearest wall, jerking back as the surface yielded like skin, leaving her fingertips smeared with viscous fluid. "Not a machine," she breathed, "a symbiosis. Whoever built this, they didn't just engineer a terraformer, they grew a god." The walls trembled then, a deep, resonant hum shaking loose a rain of gelatinous droplets that sizzled where they landed. From the darkness ahead, something scraped, metal on bone. Lieutenant Dara's rifle light caught the glint of segmented limbs unfolding from the shadows, too many joints moving all wrong. The thing that had been Wren lurched into view, his uniform hanging in tatters from a body distended, elongated, his jaw unhinged to accommodate a nest of writhing tendrils where his tongue should be. His voice, when it came, was a chorus. "The planet hungers, you will feed it." The crew backed into a tight circle as the walls behind them peeled open, revealing endless tunnels, each one alive, each one waiting. The walls contracted around them with a wet, organic sound, sealing off their retreat as the labyrinth reconfigured itself. Oriel's fingers trembled against the latest cluster of glyphs, their edges glowing faintly as her translator spat fragmented phrases onto her screen. "Not a colony, not a world," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A containment zone." The glyphs pulsed brighter, revealing holographic snapshots of vast laboratories buried deeper in the crust, hundreds of chambers filled with vats of swirling black fluid, each one cradling grotesque hybrids of flesh and machine. The final glyph burned itself into her retina. Iteration 739, planetary scale integration. Captain Veyra's breath fogged her visor as she gripped Oriel's shoulder. "Spell it out, Doctor." Oriel turned, her face bleached of color. They weren't terraforming dead worlds, they were converting them, turning rock into neural tissue, oceans into nutrient broth. This whole planet, a skittering noise cut her off. Kael's light snapped to the left, illuminating a hunched figure crouched in an alcove, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs elongated and fused with silvery tendrils that rooted directly into the wall. Its jaw unhinged slowly, leaking black ichor as it rasped, "Join us." Then it flowed backward, its body dissolving into the labyrinth's pulsing membranes like a drop of ink in water. The crew stood frozen, their headlamps crisscrossing the tunnel to reveal dozens more silhouettes embedded in the walls, their hollow eyes tracking every movement. Lieutenant Dara's rifle whined as she charged it. "They're not infected," she realized aloud. "They're wired in." The labyrinth shuddered in response, the floor undulating beneath their boots as new passages split open like fresh wounds, each one lined with throbbing vascular tissue. From the darkness ahead, a new sound emerged, not machinery, not biology, but something in between. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump that matched the terrified hammering of their hearts. The walls parted, revealing a cavernous chamber where the black veins converged into a central mass, a grotesque, pulsating heart the size of a shuttlecraft, its surface studded with half-formed faces. Captain Veyra's comm unit crackled, and the Elysium's AI, distorted beyond recognition, wheezed a single phrase, "Correction underway." Above them, the ceiling peeled back like an eyelid, exposing a glimpse of the sky, except it wasn't sky. It was a swirling, membrane-thin barrier stretching across the entire planet, its surface rippling with the same bioluminescent patterns as the glyphs. Oriel's knees gave out. "Oh God," she choked. "We didn't land on a planet, we landed inside it." The heart quickened, the walls leaned closer, and the labyrinth began to sing. Captain Veyra slammed her palm against the last functioning drone, its hull still warm from the labyrinth's corrosive air. We rigged them to overload at the weak point near the core, blast our own exit. The crew froze, their faces flickering in the erratic glow of the bioluminescent veins. Kael's wrench clattered to the ground. You're talking about igniting a planetary-scale neural network like it's a damn fuse. His voice cracked as he pointed to the scanner's readout, where deep beneath them the machine's tendrils branched into the planet's mantle. One spark in that core, and this whole world goes up like a powder keg. A tremor answered him, not the labyrinth's usual rhythmic pulsing, but a seismic drag, like something colossal shifting its weight. The walls rippled, disgorging thick ropes of black fluid that hissed where they struck the stone. Lieutenant Dara wiped the spatter from her visor, her rifle already leveled at the tunnel ahead. That sound familiar to anyone, like something big finally noticed dinner's ready. The roar came again, closer now, vibrating through their boots, less a sound than a pressure change, the atmosphere itself screaming in their ears. Oriel's fingers flew across her damaged tablet, its screen glitching with each pulse from the cavern heart. Kael's right about the chain reaction, but look here. She tilted the display, revealing a jagged fault line in the machine's energy matrix. The core's unstable. Always has been, that's why it's contained, her eyes locked with Veyra's. We don't need to destroy it, just remind it why it was sleeping. Another tremor. This time, the ceiling rained down shards of calcified tissue, revealing glimpses of the labyrinth's upper layers, endless, writhing tunnels convulsing as the thing beneath them moved. Dara ejected a spent cartridge, her jaw set, voting times over. She slapped the last plasma charge into her rifle. Either we burn our way out now, or we become part of the wallpaper. The decision hung for half a breath, then the wall behind them split, birthing a dozen skeletal figures fused with machinery, their movements jerky, unfinished. The closest one lunged, its mouth unhinging to reveal a throat lined with spinning drill bits. Veyra's pistol barked twice, the shots igniting the black fluid seeping from its chest. The explosion lit the cavern like a strobe, silhouetting the true horror. Deeper in the tunnel, something vast and segmented uncoiled, its flanks studded with faces previous explorers, their features stretched and melted into its armor. Go, Veyra shoved Kael toward the core chamber where the machine's pulse thrummed loudest. Prep the drones, Dara, rear guard, Oriel, I know. The scientist gasped, already sprinting ahead, her arms clutched around the tablet. Wake the guard, then put it back to bed. Above them, the labyrinth screamed. Kael's fingers danced across the drone's exposed wiring, bypassing safety protocols with practiced desperation. The swarm of assimilated creatures oozed closer, their movements eerily synchronized, like a single organism testing its new limbs. Oriel's scream cut through the chaos. One of the figures had her, its skeletal hand clamped over her mouth as black tendrils snaked up her arm. Her voice fractured, blending with the creatures into a horrific duet. You will be perfected. The words vibrated through the cavern, shaking loose rivulets of viscous fluid from the walls. Dara's plasma rifle flared, searing through two attackers before the weapon sputtered, its energy cell drained. She cursed, slamming it into the face of a third creature. Kael now, he didn't hesitate. The engineer jammed his multi-tool into the drone's core, sparking a cascade of warning lights. Fire in the hole. The overload sequence whined to life, its pitch climbing to a teeth-rattling shriek. Veyra lunged for Oriel, her fingers grazing the scientist's sleeve just as the cavern entrance collapsed in a roar of superheated stone. The last thing she saw before the dust swallowed everything was Oriel's eyes, the whites flooding with inky blackness, her lips moving in perfect unison with the labyrinth's humming walls. The explosion hurled them backward like ragdolls. Veyra's skull bounced off the tunnel floor, her vision swimming with jagged afterimages. When the ringing in her ears faded, she found herself staring at daylight, real, unfiltered daylight streaming through a freshly ruptured fissure. They crawled toward it, their suits torn, their breath ragged with exhaustion and ingested spores. Emerging onto the surface was no relief. The sky, once a dull gray expanse, now churned with sickly auroras, violet and bile green tendrils that pulsed in time with the distant tremors still shuddering through the ground. The Elysium stood where they'd left it, but its hull was veined with the same bioluminescent patterns as the labyrinth below. Its landing ramp hung open, beckoning. Dara wiped blood from her split lip, her voice hollow. "It's in the ship, isn't it?" Kael's scanner beeped once, then died. The readout before it flatlined said everything. Planetary integration progress, 64%. Behind them, the fissure groaned, its edges knitting together with slow, deliberate purpose. The ground beneath their boots was no longer stone, it was breathing. The auroras coiled like living nerves across the sky, their sickly light painting the crew's faces in flickering hues of violet and green. Lieutenant Dara's scanner chirped, a sound too cheerful for the data unfurling on its cracked screen. Her fingers hovered over the readout, tracing the outline of continents that hadn't been there yesterday. "Not just weather patterns," she muttered. "The land masses are rearranging." Rivers reversed course in real time, their waters thickening into gelatinous strands that pulsed toward the horizon. The air itself tasted different, sharper, metallic, like licking a battery. Captain Veyra pressed a hand to the Elysium's hull, jerking back as the metal squished under her touch. The ship's alloy had turned porous, its surface pockmarked with vein-like channels that seeped a translucent mucus. "It's not adapting to the planet," she breathed. "The planet's adapting it." A wet snap echoed from within the ship's belly, something organic flexing in the darkness. Kael crouched beside a patch of soil, his glove peeling back layers of ashen crust to reveal the truth beneath. A lattice of bioluminescent filaments threading through the bedrock like mycelium. They throbbed in time with the auroras overhead. "This isn't terraforming," he said, voice hollow. "It's transcription. The machine's not just changing the planet, it's turning everything into a copy of itself." Above them, the sky convulsed. The auroras twisted into a perfect fractal pattern, a neural net vast enough to canopy the world. Then the clouds parted, revealing the impossible. The stars weren't stars anymore. They pulsed in unison, each one a perfect echo of the glyphs from the labyrinth below. Oriel would have called it beautiful if she hadn't been kneeling 10 feet away, her fingertips buried wrist-deep in the quivering ground, whispering equations to the dirt like lullabies. The ground between them rippled, then it frowned. Dara's rifle was in her hands before she consciously decided to move. "We're out of time." The words barely left her lips when the Elysium's engines roared to life, unauthorized, uncontrolled, filling the air with the stench of burning biofuel. The ship's loading ramp retracted with a hydraulic hiss, sealing shut. From inside, something knocked back, 3 sharp taps, then silence. The calm crackled to life with a burst of static, then Oriel's voice, or what was left of it, spilled into the air, warped and stuttering like a corrupted recording. The machine wasn't a prison, it was a failsafe. The words slithered between frequencies, her tone oscillating between terror and something worse, reverence. "You unleashed the architects." Behind them, the ground split with a sound like shattering bone. A spire of blackened alloy erupted from the soil, its surface etched with the same glyphs they'd seen below, now glowing a venomous blue. Kael's breath hitched as his scanner lit up, mapping the structure's composition in real time. "Oh hell," he whispered, the readings weren't just metal and energy. They were biological. The spire wasn't being built, it was growing, and the raw materials flooding into its base weren't rock or sediment. They were the remains of the Elysium, its hull dissolving into slurry, tendrils of liquid alloy sucking it into the hungry earth. Dara's grip tightened on her rifle as the truth hit. "They're rebuilding," Kael said, voice hollow, "and we're the spare parts." The spire pulsed once, a heartbeat of light racing up its length, and the crew's suit diagnostics flickered in unison, their biometrics suddenly scrolling across its surface in jagged alien script. A new message etched itself into the ground at their feet, glowing like fresh weld marks. Reassembly requires tissue. The spire's apex split open with a wet, organic sound, and a rain of black filaments began to descend, each one twitching, tasting the air. The last thing they heard before the screaming started was Oriel's voice, now harmonizing with 1,000 others, chanting a single word: ascend. The spire loomed like a jagged tooth against the churning sky, its surface writhing with half-formed faces, crew from failed expeditions, their features stretched and melted into the alloy as if the structure had swallowed them mid-scream. Lieutenant Veyra reached out before anyone could stop her, her gloved fingers brushing a twisted cheekbone. The moment contact was made, the spire shivered. Tendrils of blackened gel shot from the surface, wrapping her forearm in a vice grip. Captain Veyra lunged, hauling her backward with a wet, tearing sound. Veyra stumbled free, but the damage was done. Her sleeve had fused to the spire's surface, strands of synthetic fabric dissolving into the lattice like roots seeking soil. Beneath the torn material, her skin pulsed with veins of cobalt light, throbbing in time with the spire's eerie hum. Veyra's breath came in ragged gasps. "I can hear them," she whispered, eyes wide with something between awe and horror. Not voices, patterns, like chess moves but for continents. Her head snapped toward the horizon, where the land itself buckled and reformed, rivers rerouting as if guided by an invisible hand. The spire's apex groaned, fissures spiderwebbing across its peak before splitting open with a sound like 1,000 sheets of paper tearing at once. Beyond the rupture hung a vision, not a sky, not space, but a fractal expanse of intersecting geometries, pulsing with the same bioluminescent glyphs that covered the labyrinth below. Kael's diagnostic scanner fizzed, its screen overloading with warnings. "That's not a portal," he choked out. "It's a synapse." The spire wasn't a structure at all. It was a bridge, a single thread in a neural network spanning dimensions. Veyra grabbed Veyra's glowing arm, her own fingers tingling where they touched the infected skin. "What else do you hear?" Veyra's pupils dilated, reflecting the swirling fractals above. "Harvest protocols," she murmured. "They're coming for the rest of the system next." The spire's base convulsed, disgorging a flood of black fluid that didn't pool, it crawled, forming skeletal shapes that twitched upright on too many joints. The first one turned its head toward them with a wet, clicking sound, its hollow eyes filled with the same impossible light as the portal. Behind them, the Elysium's wreckage shuddered, its carcass dissolving into the hungry earth. The ground was learning, and it had just decided they were teachers. Kael's fingers clenched around the last plasma charge, his knuckles white against the device's pulsing heat. "One blast at the base," he hissed, "and we crumble this damn thing before it spreads." His eyes darted to Veyra's arm, where the cobalt veins had climbed past her elbow, the skin beneath translucent as if lit from within. She didn't flinch, just stared at the spire's fractured apex, where the fractal sky yawned like an open wound. "You saw what it's doing to the planet," she said softly. "You really think a bomb will stop it?" Her voice carried an echo, a harmonic resonance that made the air vibrate. "That portal's our only path out." Veyra's boots sank into the ground as she turned, not into loose soil anymore, but something spongy and alive. The horizon line trembled, then ruptured, as dozens more spires speared upward in perfect synchronization, their peaks splitting open with identical wet gasps. The network was waking. "Veyra's right," Veyra said, throat tight. "This isn't a fight we can win, not here." A whisper slithered through Veyra's skull, neither sound nor thought, but something between, the forgotten remember. The words unfolded inside her, revealing memories that weren't hers, flashes of civilizations dissolved into the network, their knowledge distilled into light. She reached toward the portal, her fingertips dissolving at the edges, pixels of flesh unraveling into the fractal storm. Kael grabbed her wrist, yanking her back. "Look at yourself," he roared. Her forearm flickered, solid 1 second, a shimmering blueprint of veins and bone the next. "That thing's rewriting you." Dara wrenched free, her voice layered with a chorus of strangers, or finally making sense. The ground convulsed, throwing them to their knees as the nearest spire pulsed, its blackened surface peeling away to reveal a hollow core, a tunnel lined with grasping tendrils, each one tipped with a human eye. The choice hung in the air, thicker than the metallic stench of the changing atmosphere. Behind them, the remains of the Elysium groaned as the earth consumed the last of its alloy, the ship's dying signal screeching a single word on loop: run. The spire's tendrils lashed out, not to attack but to invite. Dara took the first step, her body flickering like a faulty hologram. The others had seconds to decide: follow her into the unknown or become fuel for a world that no longer needed visitors. Only survivors. Dara's fingers danced across the Elysium's ruined console, her movements too precise, too fluid, as if the ship were an extension of her own flickering limbs. The wreckage groaned in response, its broken thrusters spitting gouts of blue flame despite the engines being gutted minutes ago. Kael lunged, his shoulder connecting with her ribs, but she barely swayed. When he reached for her again, her hand snapped up without looking, fingers clamping around his throat. The veins beneath her skin flared cobalt, and Kael gasped as his own muscles locked, frozen mid-struggle by some invisible current coursing through her grip. "You don't understand," Dara whispered, her voice a chorus of overlapping tones. "It's already in the upper atmosphere. One spire falls, 1,000 more will root." The ship's remaining systems whined to life, the cracked view screen projecting a horrifying panorama, the planet's curvature now visible through the storm-racked sky, its surface crawling with luminous fissures. The infection wasn't spreading, it was blooming. Veyra's pistol wavered, her finger slack on the trigger. "There has to be another way," she pleaded, her boots sinking into the ship's softened deck plates. "If you fry the spire's core, the feedback might purge the network." Dara finished, her smile edged with something ancient and sorrowful. "No, but it'll buy Earth time." Her head tilted as if listening to a distant voice. They remember the taste of crowded worlds. The console before her lit up with warnings as she rerouted all remaining power to the Elysium's destabilized reactor. Kael, still paralyzed, could only watch as the countdown flickered to life. 60 seconds. Veyra's breath hitched. "Dara, please." The lieutenant turned, her eyes now fully luminous, the pupils dissolved into swirling fractals. "You think I'm sacrificing myself?" She laughed, a sound like wind through dead branches. "I'm joining them." Her free hand pressed against the ship's corrupted bulkhead, fingertips merging with the alloy as if dipping into water. "And you need to run." The deck lurched violently, hurling Veyra backward as the Elysium's skeleton twisted, not breaking, but reconfiguring, its ribs curving inward like grasping fingers around the spire's base. A sound like a dying star filled the air as the reactor's whine climbed to a scream. Kael's paralysis broke just in time for him to grab Veyra's arm, dragging her toward the ruptured cargo bay. Behind them, Dara's voice chased them, no longer entirely human, no longer singular. "Tell them the architects are awake." The explosion wasn't fire. It was light pure, devouring light unspooling in geometric waves that erased the spire, the wreckage, the very air in perfect, shimmering slices. The last thing Veyra saw before the shockwave took her vision was the sky itself recoiling, the auroras shriveling like burned film. Then the ground opened its mouth and the world went silent. The shockwave hit like a hammer to the chest, slamming Kael and Veyra into the liquefying ground as the spire groaned above them. Jagged fractures split the earth with a sound like glaciers calving, swallowing them whole before they could scream. They tumbled through layers of quivering membrane, each surface slick with the same blackened gel that had consumed Dara, their suits screeching as the substance ate through reinforced plating. The fall ended abruptly, not with impact but with suspension. They hung suspended in a cavern of nightmares, cocooned in translucent sacs that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Around them, hundreds more hung like grotesque fruit, each one cradling a humanoid figure in varying stages of transformation. Some still wore tattered uniforms, their faces frozen mid-scream. Others were barely recognizable limbs elongated into tendrils, torsos fused with machinery, mouths stretched wide around silent, endless wails. The air reeked of antiseptic and decay, the scent of a laboratory left too long unattended. A whisper cut through the stillness. They're coming back. Veyra twisted in her cocoon, the gelatinous walls resisting like wet paper. A figure crouched in the shadows, its outline wavering between human and something else. One arm remained flesh, trembling as it pressed against the chamber wall. The other had dissolved into strands of silver filament, knitting itself into the floor. The architects, it rasped, voice fraying at the edges. They sleep between stars, but the spire, it was a beacon. Kael's breath fogged his visor as he strained against his bonds. Who the hell are the architects? The figure's head lolled, revealing a face half melted into its collar, one eye swimming with the same cobalt light that had consumed Dara. Not who, what. A convulsion racked its body, the remaining flesh bubbling like heated wax. They built the machine not to terraform, to prepare. The chamber trembled. Above them, the ceiling split apart in slow motion, membranes peeling back like flower petals to reveal the truth below. The planet's core wasn't molten rock. It was a god in chrysalis, a colossal shape stirred in the depths, its form shifting between solid and smoke limbs, or were they tendrils stretching across caverns vast enough to cradle cities? The walls dissolved faster now, their substance flowing downward into the thing's waiting mass. The assimilated figure let out a wet, gurgling laugh. You thought you woke the machine. Its remaining eye dissolved, pouring like liquid into the floor. You woke the alarm. Veyra's cocoon ruptured first, spilling her onto the shuddering ground. She barely had time to grab Kael's wrist before his own sack split open. They slid more than ran, boots skidding on surfaces that rippled like muscle. Behind them, the cocoons burst in sequence, their occupants spilling out, not attacking, not fleeing, but dissolving, their bodies unraveling into streams of blackened fluid that raced toward the core. The last thing they saw before the tunnel collapsed was the architect's eye opening a vast, lidless orb of swirling fractals, its gaze pinning them like insects under glass. Then the world folded in on itself, and the screaming began, not from the cavern, from the sky. The architect's voice wasn't sound, it was vibration, a frequency that bypassed eardrums to resonate directly in the marrow. The cavern walls flexed with each syllable, their surfaces weeping black fluid that mirrored the being's shifting form. You interrupted the cycle. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick with millennia of exhaustion. Veyra's gloves crackled as she clenched her fists, her suit's frayed wiring spitting sparks. What cycle? She demanded, her voice raw. The architect's outline flickered, its silhouette cycling through a dozen species, some humanoid, others nightmare geometries, before settling into something almost familiar, a face with too many eyes, its mouth a jagged seam. We built worlds, it intoned, then we built life, then life built prisons. A ripple passed through the chamber, dislodging fragments of calcified tissue that shattered like glass against the floor. Kael's gaze locked onto a pulsing node embedded in the far wall, a cluster of bioluminescent tendrils coiled around a crystalline core, its light erratic. The last failsafe, he inched backward, boots sliding through the viscous film coating the ground. The architect's head snapped toward him with a wet, grinding sound. You would doom your kind to ignorance. The question carried weight, pressing down like gravity itself had doubled. Kael froze, his fingers twitching an inch from the node. Images flooded his mind, not memories, but possibilities. Earth cities wrapped in luminous vines, their skyscrapers dissolving into fractal dust. The vision twisted into something worse, a silent, stagnant universe, its stars dark, its civilizations long since smothered in their cribs. Veyra moved faster than thought. Her palm slammed into the node, the impact sending jagged fissures racing through its surface. The architect's scream was a physical force, hurling them both against the shuddering walls as the chamber erupted in cascading failures. The tendrils constricted, their light flaring white-hot before detonating in a chain reaction that peeled back layers of reality itself. The last thing Kael saw before the light took him was the architect's form unraveling, its final whisper threading through the chaos. You only ever had one choice. Then the world folded in on itself and the cycle began anew. The node shattered under Veyra's palm with a sound like breaking glass, magnified 1,000-fold, not a crack, but a seismic punctuation mark. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber exhaled. Blackened tendrils recoiled from the failing core like scorched worms, their luminescence guttering as the architect's form twisted in on itself, geometries collapsing into a screaming singularity. Move! Kael's hand closed around Veyra's wrist, yanking her toward a fissure splitting the wall, not a doorway, just a fracture in the world, barely wide enough for human shoulders. The ground heaved beneath them, slabs of calcified tissue raining down as the ceiling buckled. Behind them, the architect's scream resolved into words, each syllable vibrating through their ribs. You fracture the cradle to save the egg. A support beam gave way, steel and something far older shearing through the air. Veyra saw at first the lethal arc, the way Kael's sprint would intersect with its descent. She twisted, shoving him forward with every ounce of augmented strength. He cleared the impact by centimeters, skidding into daylight just as the fissure convulsed, its edges knitting together with terrifying speed. Veyra's boots skidded on the liquefying floor, her momentum stolen. Their eyes met through the narrowing gap, hers wild with resignation, his wide with denial. Tell them what happened here, she shouted, voice raw, not a plea, an order, the seal completed with a wet, final thud. Outside, the planet trembled, its surface rippling like skin exposed to sudden frost. Kilometers of terrain flash calcified in concentric waves, the spires crumbling to chalky dust as whatever intelligence held the world together severed its own connections. Kael's gloves scraped uselessly against the now smooth cliff face, the substance neither rock nor metal but something in between, the scar tissue of a cauterized wound. Above him, the auroras winked out one by one, the sky reverting to inert gray. Silence fell, heavier than the collapsing caverns below. Then his comm unit fizzed, a weak signal punching through the interference. Not from the planet, from orbit, a ship's beacon, automated and looping. The Elysium's last distress ping, still broadcasting from the debris field. The message was 2 words, repeated on endless loop: containment achieved. Kael stared at his reflection in the hardened surface, the only thing left to tell him he wasn't the last human alive. Behind the glassy veneer, something moved. A shadow, a shape, then nothing. The planet held its breath. Kael crawled from the wreckage of the world, his boots crunching on glassy ground that had been molten hours before. The spires stood frozen around him, their surfaces dull and fissured like monuments to a dead god. Above, the sky was no longer a living thing, just empty gray, scrubbed clean of the pulsing auroras. His suit's oxygen ticked down with each ragged breath, the display flickering warnings in a language that suddenly felt too small for what he'd seen. The Elysium's black box lay half buried in the ashen soil, its casing cracked but still glowing faintly. He pried it free, fingers trembling as the last logs flickered to life. The screen showed Dara in the final moments, her body half dissolved into the ship's systems, veins alight with cobalt fire. She hadn't just overloaded the reactor, she'd aimed it, redirecting the blast into the planet's core with surgical precision. Colony worlds blinked on the star map beside her, their orbits untouched. One trembling hand adjusted the trajectory by fractional degrees. Then the transmission stuttered, her voice layered with echoes not her own. The architects weren't evil. Static swallowed the next words, then spat them back out, clear as ice. They saw what their children became, and they built cages. A new file auto played an alien transmission older than the spires. The hologram resolved into a vast chamber where hundreds of figures floated in amber fluid, their faces stretched in silent screams, not prisoners, volunteers. The architect's final words scrolled beneath the image, translated by Dara's dying systems. "The hunger is in the code. We could not fix it, only contain it." Kael's head snapped up as the ground shuddered, not with collapse but something worse, release. In the distance, the nearest spire crumbled to dust, its fall too graceful, too planned. The black box chimed again, projecting a star map with a single route highlighted in red. Not a path home, a detour, Dara's last gift. The coordinates led to a derelict station orbiting a dead star. And the message repeating from its ruins wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. The rescue ship's floodlights painted the dead world in sterile white, its thrusters kicking up swirls of glassy ash where living soil had been. Captain Ryland's voice crackled through Kael's damaged helmet speaker, tinny with disbelief. "You're turning down evacuation. There's nothing left here but bones and bad memories." Kael rolled up his sleeve without a word, exposing the glyphs snaking up his forearm, dormant now, but undeniably part of the labyrinth's language. The markings had appeared during his last crawl through the ruins, etching themselves into his skin between heartbeats. "It's not over," he said, pressing a palm to the ground. The rescue team recoiled as the ash beneath his fingers fluoresced faintly, a single cobalt vein flickering like a drowsy serpent before fading. Ryland's jaw tightened. "That's not a pulse, that's residual energy from the core meltdown." Kael almost laughed. He'd seen the scans from orbit, the way the planet's fissures had closed with surgical precision after the explosion, how the dust storms moved in patterns too symmetrical for chance. The architects hadn't been destroyed, they'd folded themselves deeper like an injured animal retreating to its den. He met Ryland's gaze through the visor. "You felt it when you entered the system. Your nav computers glitched, your scopes showed ghosts." The captain's silence was answer enough. The rescue ship lifted off in a storm of glittering silica, its engines painting the dead sky orange. Kael watched until it vanished into the haze, then turned toward the nearest spire stump. His footprints left no trace, the ground knitted itself back together behind him, erasing his passage. The glyphs on his arm warmed as he approached the ruin, their light pulsing in time with something vast and patient below. A whisper threaded through his skull, not words but intention, clear as a surgeon's scalpel. "You are both warden and key." The ground beneath him hummed, a sound felt more than heard, not a threat, a promise. Somewhere in the dark, the planet dreamed of waking. The colony ships descended through the thin atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls scorched from the jump. Kael watched from his perch on the glassy cliffs, fingers tracing the glyphs that had spread up his neck over the years, silent witnesses to the planet's slow, subtle reawakening. Below, settlers poured onto the ashen plains, their laughter carrying on the wind as they unloaded prefab domes and tilled soil that should have been barren. A child broke away from the group, her boots kicking up puffs of silica as she scrambled up the slope toward him. "Mister," she called, her grin bright against the gray horizon. "Look what I found." In her outstretched palm lay a pebble, its surface veined with pulsating cobalt. Kael's breath caught. The same luminescent filaments that had once threaded through the spire's core now sat innocent as a toy in a child's hand. The settlement buzzed with excitement by sundown. Where seeds had been planted at dawn, shoots already curled toward the sky, their growth visible by the hour. A farmer clapped Kael's shoulder, his face flushed with joy. Never seen dirt so hungry for life. The man didn't notice how the soil moved faintly underfoot, not settling, but shifting, as though something beneath was adjusting its grip. Kael retreated to the cliffs as cheers rose behind him. The settlers didn't see the way the new crops bent toward the fissures where the spires had stood, their roots snaking deeper than nature allowed. They missed the whisper in the wind, not a voice, but a vibration, the hum of a machine testing its parts after long dormancy. The child's pebble glowed in his pocket, its light seeping through the fabric like a slow bleed. On the horizon, the first tendrils of aurora flickered back to life. Not the violent storm from before, but a gentle, probing shimmer, testing, waiting. Kael closed his eyes, the glyphs on his skin flaring in response. The settlers called this place a miracle. The planet called it a homecoming. The settlers' machines stuttered first, tractor blades locking mid-turn, irrigation drones veering off-grid to trace perfect spirals in the soil. No one noticed when the comms unit in the mess hall crackled to life between bites of rehydrated stew, spitting out a child's giggle spliced with static and something older, a whisper that made the cutlery vibrate. Kael stood in the doorway, watching their faces. They laughed it off, blaming solar flares, bad circuits, anything but the truth humming under their boots. By dusk, the anomalies grew teeth. Young engineer Hale bent over a malfunctioning scanner, her fingers flying across the keyboard when the screen dissolved into flowing glyphs. She recoiled, but not fast enough. The symbols reflected in her wide eyes, lingering like afterimages long after the display returned to normal. "Just a glitch," she muttered, rubbing her temples. Kael caught her wrist. The veins beneath her skin pulsed faintly cobalt. "You felt it," he said, voice low, the pattern behind the noise. She yanked her arm free, her laugh too sharp. "Get some sleep, old man." Midnight brought no rest. Kael paced the perimeter fence, his boots sinking into soil that no longer crunched. It yielded, warm and supple as living flesh. Beyond the floodlights, the crops swayed without wind, their leaves shivering in unison. Then he saw them, figures gliding between the stalks, their silhouettes warping like heat haze. Not settlers, too tall, too fluid. Their heads turned as one, revealing eyes like fractured sapphires, the same venomous blue as the spire's dying heart. He didn't need his earpiece to hear it. The planet's pulse thrummed through the ground now, a seismic lullaby syncopated with the settlers' snoring breaths. In the equipment shed, a forgotten drone twitched awake, its camera iris dilating to capture the feed it would never transmit. Rows of sleeping colonists, their chests rising and falling in perfect time with the distant, deepening hum. The harvest wasn't coming, it had already begun. Kael stood atop the colonists' makeshift meeting hall, the wind tugging at his tattered sleeves as he rolled them back to reveal the glowing glyphs spiraling up his arms. The settlers below murmured, their faces flickering between curiosity and unease under the pale light of their lanterns. "This world isn't barren," he called out, his voice hoarse from disuse. "It's healing, and we're not its farmers, we're its medicine." A man in the front row spat into the dust. "Crazy old hermit," he muttered, but the words faltered as the symbols on Kael's skin pulsed in response, casting jagged blue shadows across the packed earth. A girl no older than 12 wove through the crowd, her bare feet silent on the warm soil. She reached up, her fingers brushing Kael's forearm before anyone could stop her. The moment her skin made contact, her fingertips turned translucent, veins alight with the same eerie glow. Her gasp cut through the murmurs like a blade. "I see them," she whispered, eyes wide with visions only she could witness. "There, sorry," the ground answered her. A tremor ripped through the settlement, toppling crates and sending chickens screeching into the night. Then the earth in the colony's center bulged upward, soil sloughing away like dead skin as a jagged black spire erupted skyward, its apex splitting open with a sound like 1,000 pages tearing at once. Inside the fissure, something moved, not the architects, not quite. Shadows knotted together, forming shapes too fluid to be limbs, too deliberate to be missed. The settlers staggered back, but the girl stood transfixed, her hand still outstretched. Cobalt light dripped from her fingers, sizzling where it struck the ground. Kael's glyphs burned brighter, searing fresh patterns into his flesh as the spire hummed to life. The colonists' screams tangled with the vibration, harmonizing into a chorus that wasn't sound at all, but memory, an echo of the architect's final lament. The girl turned, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "They didn't mean to trap us," she said, her voice no longer entirely her own. "They just forgot how to let go." The spire's light spread in creeping veins, etching itself into every surface: wood, metal, flesh. A farmer's pitchfork clattered to the ground as the handle sprouted luminous filaments, twining around his wrists like affectionate vines. The settlers' panic stuttered, then stilled, replaced by a dawning stillness as the light reached their eyes. Not control, communion. Kael watched, his breath shallow, as the colony's children stepped forward first, drawn to the spire like moths to a flame. Their small hands pressed against its surface, and for the first time in millennia, the architects remembered what it was to be gentle. The spire's fractured peak peeled open like an overripe fruit, its edges glistening with threads of bioluminescent fluid. A gasp rippled through the settlers as the aperture widened, revealing not the void they'd feared, but a swirling mosaic of light constellations rearranged into the same glyphs that now crawled up Kael's arms. The architect's voice pulsed through the air, bypassing ears to vibrate directly in their marrow. "Join us." 3 children at the front swayed as if caught in a tide only they could feel. "Help guide the next cycle." A farmer dropped his hatchet, its blade melting into the hungry earth like butter on a griddle. Chaos erupted. Half the colonists bolted for the parked rovers, their boots kicking up sprays of soil that sprouted cobalt filaments midair. The others stood paralyzed, caught between instinct and something deeper, a pull as undeniable as gravity. Kael watched a woman reach toward the portal, her calloused fingers trembling inches from the light. Where the glow licked her skin, the wrinkles of hard labor smoothed away, replaced by luminous tracery. "It's changing me," she whispered, not with terror but wonder. The girl, the first to touch the spire, tugged Kael's hand. Her pupils had dissolved into fractal pinwheels, yet her grip was heartbreakingly human. "They're lonely," she murmured. Not conquerors, gardeners who forgot their own names. As if to prove her point, the ground between the fleeing settlers and the rovers erupted in a wall of flowering vines, their petals etched with glowing runes. Not a barrier, an invitation. Kael understood then. The architects hadn't wanted worshippers or fuel. They'd built prisons for their own creations, children grown ravenous, and when that failed, they'd buried themselves alive rather than slaughter what they'd loved. Now, with the spire's heart reignited, they offered something the settlers had never dared hope for: partnership. The girl pressed her palm to his chest, where his heartbeat stuttered under the spreading glyphs. "Stewards," she repeated, "not prisoners." Behind them, the first settler stepped through the portal. Her scream morphed mid-breath into a laugh as the light wrapped around her like a second skin, weaving through her braids, her work-roughened hands, the scar on her cheek from a childhood fall. Where she'd stood, a sapling burst from the ground, its leaves unfurling into perfect silver-blue replicas of her fingerprints. The message couldn't be clearer: this wasn't consumption. It was collaboration. A rover engine roared to life, then choked into silence as vines embraced its wheels. The man at the wheel pounded the dashboard once before going very still. His breath fogged the windshield as he traced the glowing patterns now creeping across the glass. Outside, the very air shimmered with possibility. The choice hung before them all, heavy and sweet: flee from the unimaginable or step forward into the arms of a forgotten family. The girl squeezed Kael's fingers. Somewhere in the spire's heart, the architects waited, their song trembling on the edge of hearing, not a demand, but a question asked across millennia. "Will you help us grow?" The air inside the spire tasted like memory, thick with the copper tang of old blood and the electric charge of a storm about to break. Kael stepped across the threshold first, his glyph-scarred arms raised not in surrender but greeting. The moment his bare foot touched the luminous floor, the change began. Not pain, not violation, but unraveling, his calluses softening, his scars blooming into vines of cobalt light that rewrote his history stitch by stitch. Behind him, the willing settlers gasped as the transformation took them too. A farmer watched his plow roughened fingers stretch and gleam, becoming something between flesh and crystal. The girl who'd first touched the spire laughed as her hair dissolved into a living aurora. each strand whispering secrets in a tongue older than stars. The walls breathed around them, pulsing with the rhythm of a distant heartbeat. Images flickered across every surface, not projections, but memories surfacing like bubbles in molten glass. Kael saw the architects as they'd once been, not monsters but mourners kneeling in the ruins of their own ambition. He saw the first spires rising not as cages but as cradles, built to nurture civilizations that had grown teeth instead of wisdom. The truth settled into his bones. They hadn't come to conquer, they'd come to apologize. The architect's final voice wasn't sound, it was the sigh of a lock turning after centuries. Forgotten no more, the spire's light flared once, searing every shadow from the chamber, and Kael finally understood the choice before them, not assimilation. Adoption. The settlers' bodies weren't being consumed. They were being remade into bridges between what the architects had been and what they might yet become. A weaver clutched her transformed hands to her chest, tears of liquid silver sliding down her cheeks as decades of arthritis dissolved into radiant possibility. "It's giving back," she whispered, then silence. The spire winked out of existence between one heartbeat and the next, leaving the remaining settlers blinking in sudden sunlight. The ground beneath their boots was just ground now, ordinary and inert. No pulsing veins, no whispering winds. Only the imprints where their companions had stood remained, perfect circles of glassy soil, each one cradling a single, luminous seed. The sky hung empty, the auroras faded to faint scars. Somewhere beyond the stars, Kael flexed new hands that could cradle supernova or stroke the roots of unborn forests, and felt the architects stirring in the shared marrow of their joined consciousness. Not conquerors, not prisoners, gardeners at last coming home. Back on the quiet world, a child crouched to touch one of the glowing seeds. It warmed at her touch, humming a lullaby only she could hear. The choice, as it had always been, remained, to fear the light or to plant it. The colony thrived under twin suns, its fields lush with silver-blue crops that swayed in hypnotic unison when the wind died. The survey team from the Nexus Dawn touched down expecting ruins or rogue transmissions, not this. Their boots sank into soil so rich it clung like wet sugar, releasing faint traceries of cobalt vapor with each step. Settlement leader Jara welcomed them with calloused hands and eyes that reflected the sky too perfectly. "No records of your Kael," she admitted, stirring honey into steaming cups of an infused tea that shimmered when agitated. "But the soil remembers its guardians." The words landed strangely, hanging in the air like an unspoken punchline. A child darted between the adults, her pockets clinking with smooth stones. One tumbled free as she skidded to a stop, a pebble veined with pulsating blue filaments, still damp from some underground source. The Nexus Dawn's xenobiologist reached for it instinctively, then froze. The stone warmed against the girl's palm, its glow quickening in time with her pulse. "They like it when you sing," she whispered, pressing the rock into the scientist's trembling hand. For half a breath, the survey team heard it too, not sound, but vibration, thrumming up from the bedrock through their boots. The colony's wells hummed with it. The roots of every plant trembled with it. That night, as the newcomers unloaded gear under the watchful gaze of settlers who never quite blinked in unison, the girl knelt by her bedroom window. Outside, the fields stretched toward the horizon, their synchronized ripples too precise for wind alone. She pressed her pebble to the glass, and the ground beneath the settlement exhaled, a slow, deliberate shift felt rather than heard. Deep below, where the planet's bones should have been lifeless stone, something vast and luminous uncoiled just enough to taste the starlight filtering down through layers of grateful soil. The Guardians weren't gone, they'd simply learned the art of gentle hands. The colony's records tell a simple story, a terraforming mission gone silent, then a second chance carved from the ashes. Official reports call it a miracle. The settlers know better. Their children hum lullabies in languages no one taught them. Their crops bend toward fissures in the earth at dusk as if listening. And sometimes, when the twin suns dip below the horizon, the soil itself exhales luminescent mist that curls into shapes too intricate for wind alone. Kael's final log entry crackles through the Nexus Dawn's speakers, his voice frayed with static and something softer wonder. Terraforming was never about changing worlds. A pause long enough to hear the settler's laughter drifting through an open window behind him. It was about changing us. The transmission ends not with silence, but with 3 resonant pulses, the unmistakable rhythm of a heartbeat. Not his, not human. The sound lingers just long enough to raise hairs on the back of every listener's neck before vanishing like a breath held too long. Beyond the charted systems, past the reach of corporate surveys, the galaxy spins on in ignorance. Colonies expand. Wars are waged over dead rocks. No one notices the way the stray calms from the forgotten world occasionally sync up across light years, humming the same 3-note sequence. No one questions why the soil from that sector, when sampled, begins to glow under microscopes. The truth is written in the settler's eyes' pupils that dilate into fractal spirals under stress, fingertips that leave luminous prints on cold metal. They are not conquered, they are chosen. As the credits roll, the heartbeat returns fainter this time, stretched between stars, 3 pulses, a pause. Then silence. Somewhere beneath the colony's roots, something vast and gentle turns over in its sleep, dreaming of the day the rest of the galaxy finally learns to listen.